welcome to the event Choosing Our Futures, which is part of the Our Star tour of Britain. Just to give you a bit of background on that, the Star was inaugurated in 2021, and that was in Brussels. There was a ceremony, and since then, 2 and a bit years have passed, and the organisers of the whole overall event have considered that it's now time that the Star does a trek. Excuse the pun, Star Trek. But it's a tour going round, that's their pun, by the way. It's a tour going round Britain. In the last 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, several of us were in Brussels. We saw the initial inaugural event of this tour in Brussels. We had several MEPs speaking, including Terry Leintke, she's German, Green Party MEP. We had also discussions off stage, so to speak, there. There was an exhibition with it as well. And so yesterday, farewell was bid to the Star, which is behind me. That is the Star of Unity. You'll notice that there are people holding hands. And on the back of the Star is the Star of Peace, which has doves on it. And that will be accompanying the whole tour up through Britain. It goes into Wales, and it goes right up to Scotland, where there are many cities and towns who have organised civic receptions, etc., etc. Each location has a junior panel. Today we have a junior panel with us and a senior panel. Unfortunately, I was unable to get enough speakers because of unavailability, but that has been postponed. There will be a senior panel to which all of you here are most warmly invited to come to. It will be downtown in the centre of town. The purpose of this is based on a future scope, 5 points to the Star, and in the future scope itself, we have several topics, dimensions: economy, society, environment, governance, and global affairs. And very kindly, through a connection with a local grammar school here, Simon Langton, I'll say boys, but I know that it takes girls in the sixth form. Is that correct? Yes. With a link with the teacher, Mr. Haste, and as a result of an event earlier in the year, we have a connection with the school. And we're very proud to be able to have young people here because you are our future. Our future for the organisation, but also the future for your society that you're growing up in. Right, what's going to happen is that each member here, it'll go round from the left to the right, each member, each panellist will speak for 2 to 4 minutes, and then we'll move on. They will introduce themselves. We'll move on to the next panellist, and it will go all the way round, and at the end there will then be an opportunity for members of the audience to ask questions. We could also allow members of the panel to ask each other some questions as well, and it's a general discussion. I will do my best at moderating it, and let's hope it all goes well. And I think with that, sorry, I haven't introduced myself. My name's Chris Hammond. I'm the chair of East Kent for Europe. The direction of this conversation and discussion does not necessarily have to go in the direction of the EU. We are choosing our future. So, with less waffle from me, over to our panellists, and we're starting with the topic of society. We've got RK. I will be reading initials. They will introduce themselves. Okay, over we go to RK. Remember the microphone.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Rufus, and today I'm going to be talking about an issue which mainly relates to governance. So when I was first drafting my speech, which I would give at this event, I thought the best question to ask myself, to be answered in a speech, would be whether or not the UK is safe from corruption. However, the answer to that is very, very simple. No, we're not. And I would hope that there are other self-respecting Brits like me who have made that observation too. Now, it is clear that corruption is rising across the globe. In Israel, which is a country which I've always defended as an outpost for Western democracy in the Middle East, their current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is under investigation for paying Israeli news outlets to broadcast positive opinions of him to their watchers and listeners. In Norway, Norwegian entrepreneur Nicolai Tangen exchanged a £6 million holiday to Philadelphia with who used to be the head of the Norwegian oil fund, Yngve Slungstad, for his job, meaning that Nicolai Tangen was elected head of the Norwegian oil fund. Bear in mind, this is Norway, who are ranked as the 4th least corrupt nation in the world by Transparency International's corruption index. In Germany, two German politicians' houses were raided in January of 2020 when they both accepted bribes from the Azerbaijani government to push for pro-Azerbaijani legislation in the Bundestag. And don't forget that corruption already has reached Britain when Boris had a very conveniently timed meeting with the head of the BBC, Richard Sharp. It's very easy to poke holes in my argument so far and say that I'm sort of pointing out a kind of domino effect, which is basically what I'm saying so far, but that's not the main point of the speech, because that's not how corruption works. Corruption doesn't necessarily follow on from one country to another that are neighbours, whereas it does strike on populations that are the most weak. So if we compare, for example, Britain to France, what happens if a politician in France lies or is found for corruption? Well, they'll be ousted from their position almost as quickly as the scandal came to light, whereas in Britain it's more of a point laugh, ha ha, I told you so. We don't take it as seriously over here. Why? Because we don't expect our politicians to do anything but lie. Which means that when these scandals do come to light, like I say, we don't take them seriously enough. And we don't expect any politician to follow through on their promises in Parliament, nor do we expect them to adhere to the standards that they should be adhering to. So that's why, in the long run, I think French politics will be okay. Even though spectating from the other side of the English Channel, it looks fairly chaotic and looks like it's about to collapse. In the long run, it will be fine. But for Britain, I'm not so sure. Thanks very much for listening.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke and I'll be talking about where has trust gone in British politics, and more importantly, when will it come back? Please come back. All right. Out of the quagmire of Brexit, the British public saw emerge a much more deeper and sinister monster to melee with. That which cannot be solved with policy or ideas or rhetoric or manifestos, and is in fact made worse by the failures in those. Actually, the problem of trust is much more insidious than any laws which have to be passed. The viciousness of the Brexit campaign led to such deep gashes being opened up. And this is the fault of not Leave or Remain, not Nigel Farage or David Cameron. This is the fault of both parties, both sides, fighting without care for what will come after the referendum. What I think the British public saw was Project Fear versus Project Lie. Falsehoods on a bus one day, and the demise of Western civilization, that's a quote, on the next. The amount of slander and attack sustained by both sides led to some irreparable wounds being cut into our system. And this is shown by the statistics. In March 2022, the OECD published a trust survey which showed that a paltry 35% of us still had faith in government. And that falls to only 1 in 5 people having faith in the parties. That is atrocious. Now, distrust has always been a part of politics. It's the natural result of when the people in power make a mistake and antagonize the people that vote for them. But the current era of dismal pessimism about what the government can do for us has exceeded the healthy limits of a functioning British democracy. And I think we can draw that route back to Brexit. Now, in conclusion, I am deeply concerned about the level of distrust in British politics. It is not a casual generational thing. It will not pass away without deep and concerted efforts. And as we head into the next election cycle, where we see two centrist technocrat politicians vying with massive fear of overstepping their boundaries and not actually accurately representing the needs and wants of the British people, I see no hope. I know not all of the distrust in British politics is down to Brexit, but I think that a lot of what we see in our problems today, mentioned by Rufus, Partygate, issues with MPs' conduct in Commons, I think a lot of those issues can be traced back to Brexit, and I think they need to be solved, or the future of British politics may be at stake.
Thanks very much. On to our next speaker, who is AP.
I'd like to just start this off with two apologies. One for my speech being a bit more broad than my colleagues, and the next for carrying on the trend of pessimism. When presented with the prospectus for this event and asked to consider what I think of the future of politics, my thoughts immediately gravitated towards society. Growing up amongst the rise of Industry 4.0, the ubiquity of social media, the influence of social, cultural dynamics have reached unprecedented heights. My worldview has been shaped by society. For me, politics is society. In contemplating the state of society in England and my views on the future of it, I just delved very briefly into the 5 topics that were also presented on the prospectus. For example, citizen rights. We can look to the 2023 Public Order Act, which significantly amplifies the authority for suspicionless stops and searches, raising important questions about our privacy and civil liberties. Even more so, we can talk about democracy and representation. It's not a new debate to criticize the first past the post system. We can just look to the elections of 1950s and 70s and see obvious flaws about the representation of our people's wills. As for diversity and shared values, I mean, this is personal to me. I'm a first-generation immigrant, and upon arriving, I did my GCSEs at Spires Academy, and I believe that the integration of understanding and diversity of other cultures is lacking in certain aspects of the UK, aspects of our education system, sorry. And then I move on to social equality and mobility. Sorry if this is stretching on a bit broad. But Brexit's repercussions on small businesses have been profound, throwing them into disarray. I mean, there are many case studies which we may talk about later, but it just questions policies that foster growth, resilience, and equal opportunities, and if we'll get them. And as for health and welfare, I mean, when I arrived, my father was a care worker, and many care workers are immigrants. We currently have a huge crisis in the NHS with a lack of staffing, a lack of nurses, and Brexit could be completely blamed for this. 58,000 fewer nurses, a meager 800 coming from the EU in 2018. This calls for urgent action to ensure a robust and accessible healthcare system. In reflecting on these, I'm compelled to emphasize that society is undeniably our future, yet our future, our society, is at risk of neglect. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be talking about society. That's LT.
Okay. Hi, I'm Laura. Continuing with the pattern of pessimism, I'm talking about the impacts of social media. According to Ofcom, 98% of 12 to 17-year-olds use social media. With future generations being raised in the digital era, I'm concerned with the potentially adverse impacts this could have on mental health, democracy, and society. As a young person who uses social media, The correlation between social media and the mental health epidemic is clear. Both influencers and corporations are able to utilize growing insecurity amongst young people to their advantage, pushing products intended to cure these insecurities. Furthermore, amongst other young people who may feel disenfranchised by new liberal ideas, the issues of echo chambers is becoming prevalent. Instead of helping these young people become more confident, these influencers misinform them and draw hatred from them, therefore undermining the efficacy of democracy as people fall victim to political extremism. We have seen violent misogynists such as Andrew Tate rise to notoriety, and it leaves me wondering how long this can go on for. The Online Safety Bill is the latest piece of legislation proposed by the government designed to minimise the damages of social media on young people. However, I fear that it does not go far enough. The legal but harmful definition was scrapped by the government for adults in order to protect freedom of speech. Yet now people will no longer be afforded protections from content potentially containing abuse. Because of this, I feel that the protection of freedom of speech has gone too far, as it no longer bolsters rights and actually serves to protect the people that intend to cause damage. Although I understand the importance of freedom of speech, my concern lies with whether in the process of protecting it, we are actually damaging our democratic institutions by allowing uneducated political extremists to corrupt political thought. If influencers continue to be able to spread hatred amongst young people, not only will the mental health epidemic worsen, the UK electorate will become more polarised, and extremist leaders will be able to utilise this, as they have done before elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to the environment with Said Why.
Thank you very much. This is not massively about the environment, it's more about agriculture. My name is Zach. My original question was going to be, what is the state of UK food security? And to be completely honest, I should have laughed because it practically doesn't exist, or it's just as bad as that. Farmers and agribusiness as a whole face four main issues. Government with a lack of interest that is not paying attention to their needs. Environmental schemes and programs that, though mean well, are actually doing quite a bit of harm. And supermarkets driving the costs of things down while the cost to produce them continue to climb ever higher. Some people may wonder what the point in food security is. The government certainly does. And with 48% of our food being imported, the majority of the population will always have the necessary amount of food today, but that will not always be the case, especially like during the Second World War, for example. It wasn't the fact that they could have invaded us that made the Nazis come so close to beating us. It was the fact that they could have starved us that allowed the Nazis to come so close to victory. As sad as it is, I'm not about warmongering or dramatising here. About 12 years ago, Sir John Beddington, the government chief scientist at the time, alongside the Royal Society 3 years later, or 3 years before, warned that we were facing a perfect storm of climate change, rising population and urbanisation. And that as part to fight back at this, we needed strong environmental policy and also a good focus on food production. We've seen lots of food policies, environmental policies so far, but I don't think we've seen anything on food production. Last year, the government spent, or claimed to have spent, 2.5 billion on supporting British farms, according to the BBC. You would think this might come in the form of subsidies or payments to produce grain and crops that are dearly needed, but this came in environmental payments, which for growing, which are now so appealing and giving so much money for growing them, are actually more appealing than growing traditional crops for the majority of British farms, since the majority of British farms are small. And I want to think that in the future, if 50% of land is put into environmental products, then what's actually going to be left to feed the population? The government will need to decide, does it want to feed the birds or does it want to feed the people? Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is FL, and that's the economy.
Hello. Hello. My name is Finn, and I will be talking about the economy. Now, I will try and break it down as best as possible because it is quite a broad subject, but I'll first talk about international trade. Suggesting that Brexit has caused a major disruption between UK businesses with tariffs requires a more nuanced analysis. Yes, in 2021 there was disruption and delays with borders. However, over time, businesses have adapted to these new procedures. The HMRC reported that 30% of businesses reported difficulties, but in the third quarter of that year, only 11% of businesses were struggling with these procedures, which is a massive drop. There's an economic theory called time consistency, which was designed by Edward Prescott. And he suggested that when governments set out a policy, it's important for them to stick with that policy, because businesses and markets adapt to that change to try and achieve what the governments are setting out. Therefore, with Brexit, markets and businesses know what governments are trying to achieve and what we're trying to do. Therefore, they are adapting their research and development on the implications of Brexit. Therefore, what is the benefit of changing our route and deciding to go back into the single market, which to me doesn't seem much sense, especially when, if you take into consideration of time consistency, businesses will already be adapting to the implications of Brexit. So the economic significance. The EU regulation is the EU is a single market with no tariffs, which in a way makes it uncompetitive. The competitive nature of the EU is taken out. And if I running out of time, if I go to the point that leaving the EU enhances our ability to govern and enhances our ability for businesses to adapt to changes. Unfortunately, in the EU, if change has to be made, it has to be accepted by all the members to then be put out into policy. Whereas now leaving the EU, we have the sovereignty of our parliament to act and adapt to change more effectively. And I'll finish that there. I won't be expecting any claps.
Our next speaker is going to talk about governance. Do help yourselves to water if you feel you need to at any point. Don't be embarrassed in standing up to get it. Okay, so as I say, and that's JK talking about governance.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jaden, and my voice isn't great today, but I'll do my best. My question is on, does your vote matter? And I won't completely add to the train of pessimism today, but because there is an optimistic note. I do believe that voting for smaller parties is the change our country needs. However, there is a key problem in this country with a neoliberal consensus in our politics.
We have two main parties, Labour and Conservative, which neither of which question key policies. For instance, both of them Labour opposed increasing corporation tax from 19% to 25%, putting them to the right of the Tories on that particular issue. In addition, neither of them support nationalising things like utilities, despite the fact 57% of Tory voters support nationalising utilities. That was according to an Ipsos poll last month. And if we look at the alarming trend of people's civil liberties being taken away from them, Starmer only recently said that he would allow the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act as well as the Public Order Act to, quote-unquote, settle in to British law. The sad truth about Brexit is that it was a cry for change. It was people voted for Brexit in the vague hope that there would be a change that would benefit them. And a problem with the Remain campaign is that it failed to offer an alternative to the current system back in 2016. There was a high council estate turnout to the referendum, mostly to vote Leave. And those people were not inspired by the current system, which had nothing to offer them but crippling austerity measures. So, in my view, my closing words will be: vote for smaller parties. Do not allow the Labour and Conservatives to continue their dominance of British politics. Otherwise, nothing will change. Thank you very much.
I'm going to continue on how Jaden's idea of voting for smaller parties could actually be put into practice. Because I'm going to be thinking about whether the UK needs to reconsider its approach to elections, with first past the post continuing to unfairly represent the public. In the 2019 general election, only 44% of the vote was for the Conservative Party, but the system we used to allocate majorities meant that 56% of seats ended up as Conservative, entitling them to 100% of the power. This idea of a minority being in power contradicts our democracy in its simplest terms. The 2019 election was not unique in this respect, because for around 90% of other general elections since 1935, there have been single-party majority governments, while none of them have had the support of a majority of voters. Pair this with the fact that in the 2019, just over 16% of votes were for the Greens, Lib Dems and Brexit Party, who collectively only share 2% of seats, and at the very least, questions might be asked about whether voters are being represented fairly. Proportional representation could be the answer, as, if used carefully, it would eradicate every issue that there is with our current system, and it could maintain the one benefit we currently enjoy: extremist viewpoints tend to be left out. Currently, political diversity is suppressed due to unequal votes, with UKIP in 2015 gaining only 1 seat from nearly 3.9 million votes, while the SNP had 56 seats from less than 1.5 million. Proportional representation would also mean that the percentage of seats in the House of Commons for each party would reflect the percentage of votes they got. That would stop people having to tactically vote, it would prevent wasted votes, and would stop people from having to be represented by MPs they didn't vote for from marginal victories. A famous example of PR being used and failing was Weimar Germany. There, the system became quickly flawed, as the only way majorities were achievable was for larger parties to go into vast coalitions with several smaller ones in order to get more than the 50% threshold of seats. This inevitably led to these smaller parties having much more influence than they should have done, as they could have easily blackmailed the larger parties. I think that this problem could have been avoided had Germany gone for a system based on 2 elections. The first would be open to the public to vote for whomever they wanted, but the second, perhaps a week later, would allow the voters to choose between a small number of just the top parties, which would likely avoid extremist politics and would ensure that the smaller parties do not get unfair advantages. The manifesto on which Tony Blair won Labour's landslide victory in 1997 promised that he would investigate a change to PR, but after the Jenkins Commission of 1998 had been published, Blair ignored this advice, as the unfair system that had been wounding the Labour Party for so long before that was at the time in fact working for their benefit. So it is therefore perhaps wishful thinking that one day our voting system might change. However, with increasing public knowledge of the benefits PR would bring, politicians will hopefully start to feel the pressure to go with what the country needs. Thank you.
I'm going to go back to the main narrative of pessimism. Today, I'm here to discuss the critical topic of governance, focusing on the comparisons between Britain and Greece, particularly in light of the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. As I begin, let us acknowledge the undeniable truth: Britain is broken. However, through a comprehensive analysis of various aspects, including the rebound from the pandemic, recent economic developments, interest rates, differences in government approaches, and the significance of Greece to Europe, we can shed light on the path towards a brighter future for Britain. First and foremost, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the weaknesses within the governance structure of many countries, including Britain. The response to the crisis has been marred by mismanagement and a lack of preparedness. In contrast, Greece, which has faced its own share of economic challenges over the years, has demonstrated resilience and determination in effectively managing the pandemic by prioritizing statistical expertise and utilizing data-driven strategies. Greece has successfully mitigated the impacts of the virus on its population. As we transition from crisis management to recovery, the bounce back from the pandemic became crucial. Greece has recognized the need to incorporate experts and individuals with a deep understanding of numbers and statistics into their government. This forward-thinking approach allows Greece to make more informed decisions based on empirical evidence, ensuring more effective recovery for their nation. In contrast, Britain must reflect on its governance and consider adopting a similar approach to bolster its recovery efforts. Turning our attention to recent economic developments, Greece has made commendable strides in stabilizing its economy through strategic reforms and investments. Greece has attracted foreign direct investment, enhancing its economic growth prospects. In contrast, Britain has faced significant economic challenges, including a decline in trade, a rise in unemployment rates, and it is high time for Britain to revisit its economic policies and prioritize fundamental reforms to stimulate growth and regain its economic stability. Interest rates play a pivotal role in shaping the economic landscape of a nation. Greece has successfully managed to lower its interest rates, making it more attractive for businesses and investors. This has facilitated the revitalization of their economy and contributed to the overall recovery. Britain, on the other hand, needs to reevaluate its interest rate policies to create a conducive environment for investment, thus stimulating growth and rebuilding its economy. One crucial aspect that sets Britain and Greece apart is their differing approaches to governance. Britain, once a pioneer in democratic governance, has lost touch with its roots. It is essential for Britain to return to the basics of good governance, ensuring transparency, accountability, and active citizen participation. By fostering trust and exclusivity, Britain can rebuild its democratic institutions and restore faith in its governance systems. Finally, let us acknowledge the importance of Greece to Europe. Greece holds a unique position as the cradle of democracy and European civilization. It is not just a nation grappling with economic challenges, but a symbol of resilience and cultural heritage. Europe must recognize the significance of Greece and extend its support to ensure the country's successful recovery. By nurturing Greece's growth, Europe can foster unity and solidarity with its member states. In conclusion, while it is true that Britain is broken, it is not beyond repair. By analysing the rebound from the pandemic, recent economic developments, interest rates, differences in governance, and the importance of Greece to Europe, we can identify the necessary steps to make Britain better. It is imperative for Britain to learn from Greece's successes and adopt a more data-driven approach, prioritise economic reforms, and return to the core principles of good governance. Together, we can forge a brighter future for Britain, ensuring a resilient and prosperous nation for generations to come. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And we move on to RC, also on governance.
Hello, my name is Robin. I'm here to ask whether the UK may break apart. Despite the Supreme Court's relatively recent ruling that the Scottish Parliament cannot call a referendum on leaving the United Kingdom, support for secession, especially in Scotland and Northern Ireland, is generally on the rise, especially with the younger generation. Despite this tension, which has only been exacerbated by Brexit, which Northern Ireland and Scotland voted against, the UK government has made no clear effort to try and prevent separatism. Mark Drakeford, the First Minister for Wales, believes that the UK government should devolve more power to the devolved parliaments and define the power of these parliaments more clearly so that those not in England will feel less resentful towards Westminster. However, you could argue that this approach would do the opposite, as these devolved governments could then keep on asking for more and more power, isolating them from Westminster further. So ultimately, I don't believe that there's any clear effort that the government could make which would prevent this. One possible explanation or solution that Mark Drakeford himself presented was the idea of a federated United Kingdom with proper constitutional powers given to the devolved parliaments. However, with the current government and also Brexit still being a problem, it still does not seem like any current government or party would believe that this is a good idea. Thank you.
Thanks very much. On to AR, who's going to take us to global affairs.
Hiya, my name's Adam. Sort of half pessimistic, sort of half optimistic, really, is the sort of track that I'm trying to follow. So I've come here to speak in front of you about the current state of the defence in our nation. As a proud member of the Army Cadet Force and aspiring British Army officer, I'd say I'm rather informed to speak about the situation we're in. Winston Churchill stated that Europe could not afford to continue in an atmosphere of hatred and revenge springing from the injuries of the past. This, of course, refers to our state of cooperation among our EU counterparts, as having strong allies drastically reduces the chances of conflict, which we all strongly feel is vital to the condition of our security. I clearly would like to state that cooperation is essential to any area of defence. But however, due to government funding cuts, our armed forces are left in a most concerning situation. The government has axed a concerning amount of our infantry regiments who are absolutely indispensable to our solidarity. The following regiments that have received axes and funding cuts have been the 5th Battalion Royal Regiment of Scotland, the Agro Sutherland Highlanders, 1st Battalion Yorkshire Regiment, 2nd Battalion Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, 3rd Battalion Mercian Regiment, and 2nd Battalion Royal Welsh Regiment, and even 13th, 18th Dragoon Guards. As an infantry regiment, these are really very strong and concerning axes to very vital and very historic regiments of our British Army. Decising is not the way forward. This is a subject that is certainly overshadowed in our media and has strong causes for concern. I have some statistics that I'd like to bring up. Since 1970, the numbers in the British Army have fallen by a staggering 44%. I find this rather distressing, and many of our people, not only in government, must certainly also be concerned by this. This has somehow managed to escape the public eye and deceit the priorities of our representatives. There are two real key ways to keeping a country secure from possible threats. The first one is having good relationships with other states, and the second one is rather sort of a more data-based classification, which denotes two classes of defence force, tiers 1 and 2. A tier 1 defence force is a task force that is ready for deployment with high readiness for any combat situation, with enough ammunition, logistics and supplies to see out a conflict with little to no problems. The second is tier 2, which in 5 to 10 years are probably required to make the armed forces ready for a conflict that could threaten the nation. Ex-General Sir Richard Barrons stated that the British Army is not ready for conflict, as in fact tier 2, due to low supplies, issues with recruitment. This has dropped dramatically since the end of the Cold War. Moreover, the possible steps the British Army is taking, in a sort of more positive light, we are slowly moving forward in other areas. Reports in discrimination in the armed forces have considerably fallen since our no-tolerance approach to discrimination. This is a vast step forward in terms of inclusion and diversity, as stereotypes were almost certainly a barrier to recruitment. The armed forces has also developed new technological capabilities in the last 10 years, with 4-5 Commando and Ranger Regiment have been upgraded to the British Army's new lighter L4031 rifle, which boasts better technical accuracy and capabilities. As someone who has fired the current SA-80 with cadets, so it's totally legal, this could definitely help us achieve Tier 1 capability alongside the deployment of the new Challenger 3. We have to ask our politicians this. Why do we live in a period where politicians say yet do not act? This is time for us and our government to really give something back to our armed forces. They serve the nation without, rain or shine, giving up lots of time to not see their families, even including Christmas Day. They give us so much, so I ask for the government to give something back to them. This government is almost certainly declining to meet the standard for protection, and with the increasing threats from Russia, China, North Korea in this segment, the government simply cannot afford to let us down. So give back to the armed forces who do so much for us. I'd like to thank you for your time and thank East Kent for Europe for this great opportunity to speak today.
Thanks very much. This is a huge array of exceptionally good views on so many of these topics. So at this point, I'd like to perhaps throw it open, first of all, to any initial questions from the audience, if we have any questions. And we've got two, so I'll take first of all the lady there in the middle, and then we'll move on to Mr. Haste. And perhaps you'd like to make it clear whether your question is general or whether you're directing it at any particular speaker or panelist.
Good afternoon. And thank you very much for coming and talking to us. I would like to actually ask 3 questions to all of you. The first question is, could you raise your hands, any of you who have visited one or more countries of the EU? That looks like almost all of you. Next question, could any of you raise your hand who have a parent or immediate close relative from one of the European Union countries? 2 of you. And third question, could you raise your hands if there were to be a referendum tomorrow, if you would vote to join the EU? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's something over half. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question. Thanks for the show of hands. We could come back to that after we've had some more questions. Mr. Haste.
My question's for Zach and Adam, I think. And you describe a world where security is absolutely imperative, whether it's food security or securing ourselves through better military protection. Isn't that you allude to 1939, Zach, talking about the threat from Germany and the Nazi Party. Isn't that an old world? Hasn't the world changed since then? And security in the way that you talk about it. Is it just not as important now? Do we need to secure ourselves by providing all of our own food or by having a strong military? Or can we just get our potatoes from Belgium and, rely on NATO and collective security pacts for our defence?
Well, I think that one day, whatever happens, there are going to be food shortages. And although the world's different to 1940, we see history repeat itself all the time. And while I understand the UK cannot be entirely food sufficient, and we do have to rely on some imports, I don't see harm in championing home food, because it is, well, I can't think of any reasons that it would be worse than foreign food.
Thanks very much, Zach. Did we have another question there? Yes.
Hello. I also want to thank you for coming, and I've listened with great interest to all your lectures, as it were. I want to add on to the question, would you want to rejoin the EU if there was a vote tomorrow? And I was slightly disappointed to see a few hands going up and not everyone. We will go to London tomorrow on the Rejoin March, and I've just been out before we started here handing out leaflets to the students here at the Freshers Week, and I was very surprised that no one knew there would be a Rejoin March tomorrow in London. Probably the BBC will ignore it as well, because according to the BBC, we've never been on marches in London. They've never sent any TV people to record it. And perhaps tomorrow we will just, with the thousands of us who are there, not be acknowledged by anyone. So really, I must tell you about my disappointment. Also, talking to the students here outside, that they didn't know about the Rejoin March, and that half of them were not politically interested at all. And that also surprises me slightly. But anyway, thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much for the question. Well, the statement, we could come back to that. I'll try and elicit some reactions. Are there any reactions to that? Yes?
Yeah. Is this working? Is it? Yeah, apparently. Okay. I would say on the lack of young people interested in politics that it becomes very easy to become disenchanted and pessimistic, as I think it was clear by most of our speeches, when the state of politics is in such a dismal low point. And I think that has a lot to do with the way politicians present themselves now. In an aging country where there's more people that are out of work because they're too old than ever, politicians have to appeal to elderly people and people that are above the age of 40 more so than they have to appeal to the demographic 18 to 24. I think that leads to a massive lack of new talent and new people coming through that can really inspire young people in the way that was possible 50 years ago when there was a lot of immigration, young people coming into the country, and it was much easier for a politician to win based on their appeal to young people. So I think the issue with political disenfranchisement and less young people interested boils down to the politicians and not so much the young people who would die for the opportunity. Well, maybe that's a bit too far. They would go for the opportunity to have a politician speak to them, but unfortunately there isn't too many of them at the moment.
Thanks very much for a good, excellent answer there. Are there any other panelists who would like to add anything to the comments there? Yes, we've got quite a few. That's excellent. Over on there, over on the left.
I'd also sort of like to add to that about that sort of thing of participation. You look at the majority of people who are in the House of Commons, they're all over 50. There's only, a couple MPs. Obviously, Canterbury's one, Rosie Duffield, she's a young MP. But you just have to look at that and obviously look at the age brackets of voting as well. If you look at the 18 to 24 age bracket in the UK general elections, especially in the last 10 years, compared to the ages of 60 and over, there's such a big difference. Young people, I don't think they're really engaged in politics because the people who are in politics are consistently a lot more older than, the people who actually... So young people, they need to be led by someone who can say that, okay, I'm actually going to represent you because, obviously this is European Union that we're also talking about here. The majority of people that actually voted to leave the EU and who actually voted in the referendum were of that age bracket where they're a lot older. So I just think that young people need to be given a lead into politics and a sort of way into politics that's sort of beyond interests. I think they need to be given, this sort of view by people who can actually have captivating ideas that appeal to young people rather than appeal to a party or a particular ideology. That's what I'd like to say. So, yeah,
Thanks very much. So the question might be thrown out, but I'll take another point first. But so the suggestion that to encourage younger people into politics and to actually get them involved. So we'll try and remember that to lead on, but there is another comment here and perhaps over there.
I think one of the main problems that we face, that young people face with politics at the moment, is that it's seen as a taboo to talk about politics around young people. Especially when you're sort of growing up, sort of primary school age, people don't tend to talk about politics, maybe because it's often depressing, but more so because there's just sort of not much going on in the world of young children about it. I mean, you've got on children's television, you've got brilliant programs introducing us to history and music and things like that, but there's nothing that I had when I was growing up that sort of that introduced me to politics. And I think what I would imagine most of us here are lucky to have had parents who have been informed and informing us about politics, not informing, but sort of introducing us to it, which is obviously vital. But I think something else that could be tackled is the sort of the people sort of stepping around politics for young people, and I think it should be more broadly embraced by the people who are nurturing these children. I mean, in schools and on and what the children do for sort of entertainment. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's the fault of politics and our MPs and leaders, but also because there's sort of nothing available for people to get them interested in it.
I think that's something I would share as well, and come back to that point, but we've got yet another one here.
Another problem is the fact that parties which disproportionately have the support of young people are repressed by first past the post. For instance, a statistic I am lucky enough to have to hand is the fact that the Greens won 2.7% of the popular vote at the last election. And that means they should have 17.5 seats in the House of Commons. And they have one MP. So that's an indication that the voices of young people are being stifled by our system, as well as our culture, as Wilf very succinctly pointed out.
Thank you. I think I'd share those. I'm not meant to, but...
As a young person who studies politics and intends to study it further, people do ask me, do you want to be a politician? And my answer is always no, because when I look around and I see like politicians growing up, you see on the news, you see politicians laughing at people during the pandemic with the Partygate incidents, and you hear them speaking and they laugh at the fact that they were able to celebrate whilst everyone else was locked inside, and you think, do I really want to be part of one of those people? Do I have to be someone that has to moderate my views to fit in with mainstream parties? Not really. And I think also like a lot of young people, when they see that, they think politics doesn't, like, they don't want to be associated with that kind of, I don't know, almost corruption, I guess. And yeah, I just think if young people now seek participation in various ways, not necessarily directly through the election, and obviously the election is probably the easiest way to get your view across, but young people do care about politics. If you ask a lot of people, if you ask them views about people's rights and stuff like that, they will often have something in response. But I just think that they just don't feel represented by the people that are in power at the moment, and not necessarily maybe due to their age, but just the way that everything just seems so moderate, and so like if you're in a party you have to agree with your leader. Although obviously sometimes that's not always the case, but it does feel like that, and it's just like, what more what can you do?
Chris, can I say something now? Can I?
Sure, there's a question there. Have you also a point? Should we just allow the question and then you come in there?
Well, look, I'm not going to ask a question. I mean, I was a sixth form in the early 70s, and a lot of the things you've been talking about, I heard then in Langton Boys Debating in Leicester. There was a lot of talk about proportional representation then. It was the same old story. We had the Labour Party and the Tories, we had Wilson and Heath juggling for position on alternate elections. Jeremy Thorpe, who you probably don't have heard of, but he ran the Labour Party, was a boss of the Liberal Party. I think this whole I'm sorry, I've been disappointed by this. I think this whole performance of pessimism about politics in your life is disgraceful. I think it's a luxury of living. I'm not some sort of, I run a big publishing company in Canterbury. I'm not some sort of left-wing rebel, but I mean, I think it's a luxury of affluence and having a nice, comfortable life. You should not accept pessimism. You should make with your own lives what you want your lives to be and what you want the world to be. And if they think politicians are not helping, then do something about it. And one great thing you can do, in my opinion, is to be active in the campaign to rejoin the European Union. I think it's an unprecedented disaster. As a businessman on whom about 400 people's livelihoods are dependent on me, I think what happened with leaving the European Union was an utter disaster for Britain. And I think that you don't need to become politicians if you don't want to. But I think you can, in your own lives, your own energies, you can actually do things to make the world better. I think, it's easy when you're a sixth former to sort of lapse into pessimism and complacency. Why shouldn't you? You do your studies, you'll get a job eventually, and you'll get a nice job, you have a nice social life. The world is very attractive to young people now. When I was a kid in the 70s, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have social media. In fact, I think it's the most wonderful things in the world. But I think you should not let yourselves lapse into pessimism, and I think you should think about what you can do to help get Britain back into the European Union.
Thanks for the challenge. I think it is. Do we have some reactions here? Oh, gosh, plenty. I would expect that. Thank you. So, hands up with reactions. I think, yes. I'll take, we'll take the reaction from, in the blue shirt, from AP, and then we've got some reactions over here. Oh, consider it.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm Adam. I'll try incorporate an answer to both the previous question and your... Sorry? James's question from the audience. I believe that there is a large amount of pessimism and political apathy in young people. And I think all of my colleagues' previous points were quite pertinent. I think there should be more accessibility. As you said, you grew up in the 70s and these exact same questions were brought up, and that should change. There should be more questions. There should be more thinking about it. There should be more accessible ideas to allow people to think about how they can actually change things instead of just arguing why they're bad. I'm sorry if my wording is a bit off. But yeah. Pretty much. I'm also going to link this to society because I'm in this corner. But linking to Lauren's emphasis on social media, we do live in, as I said, Industry 4.0. We live in an era where social media has taken precedence over young people's lives and those of older generations. If I want to link it to Brexit, I can refer to Facebook campaigning and the effect that had. But among young people and social media, politics is limited to those who are radical and those who are apathetic. Social media is a breeding ground for echo chambers, and very few times or very infrequently will there be legitimate discussion. And the solution for that is to let young people have more accessible routes into politics. Citizenship has been brought into, I think citizenship has been offered as an attempted solution for this, but I think in younger years there should be more education about politics and more opportunities for young people to develop a voice rather than hear one.
We're hearing very many very good points here, mentioned here, citizenship, that the young do care about politics. I think we can look at the continent where citizenship is certainly plays a role in schools and in certain schools here in Britain, and I agree with you there immensely. We have got some more reactions though.
Just on the point of young people being interested in politics, I'm not quite sure what you want, because I mean, here we are. But the thing is, I do accept your point about easily falling into a trap of pessimism. But instead of criticizing us and young people having historically always been pessimistic about politics, isn't it much better to in fact question why young people always get pessimistic about politics, and think about historically what the reasons are behind people in power never inspiring us young people. I don't think it's fair really to sort of tell us that we're not trying hard enough here, because we all clearly do have a deep interest in politics. It's just we're all, and historically have done, as you said, growing up in the 70s, we've all been feeling that we've been let down by our politics, and that's, I mean, it is up to us to sort of stand up for what we think, but, for a lot of people that's very tricky, given the sort of the level of sort of unfairness and inequality in the system, which just turns people off politics. I mean, yeah, I just don't frankly, I don't really agree. But I mean, I accept your point. But yeah, thank you.
Excellent answer. Thank you very much. Over on the left there, and then over to the two on my left as well.
Yeah, so I'd sort of take up your point as well, but I really don't think that you can obviously say young people are pessimistic, because obviously that's probably true among a lot of people, but pessimism is not exclusive to young people, and especially in politics. Loads of people are pessimistic. You know, Dominic Grieve, he obviously spoke here with East Kent for Europe only a couple months ago, and he said that the period from 2017 to 2019 in Parliament was, you know, and in politics was just one of the worst periods for politics, you know, that we witnessed in Britain. It was one of the most monumental sort of events that we've had. And that pessimism is not exclusive to young people. I think that's ridiculous to say that a trait is, you know, only part of a certain age group. It's among a lot of people, and it's just that young people are not pessimistic. It's just it doesn't really appeal to them. If you even take the, you know, situation in America, I think American politics has put off people so much. You know, it's really distanced young people from politics, even over here. And you look at their ages. You know, the two main candidates for the, you know, U.S. presidential elections, they're pensioners. They're, you know, old. So I don't really think that pessimism is exclusive to young people. I'd obviously acknowledge that there is a bounce of pessimism in our age group, but there's reasons for that, and it's not just exclusive for us, really, is what I'd say.
I think all of this, it's somewhat easy to say for someone who grew up in the 70s to criticise young people, because it's difficult to not be pessimistic when the neoliberal poison has completely taken hold of our country. The 70s was before Thatcher. We're now at a point where our economy is so heavily privatised. It's so difficult to buy a house, much more difficult than it was during the 70s. We now have, as a young person, there is so little hope. And and going back to Brexit, if we rejoin the EU, are we not just back in 2016 when we already had, it's estimated by newspapers like The Guardian that tens of thousands of people were indirectly killed by austerity, by these policies. And that was a political choice. It was a choice to make cuts to the vital services like the NHS rather than increasing taxes on the wealthy, rather than increasing corporation tax, which both our parties, well, it's the Conservative Party, which I wouldn't normally defend, but they were the ones that increased it when Labour opposed it. So both the parties, the Westminster duopoly, are both to blame.
Wonderful answer there.
I'm going to try and bring my answer a bit more full circle, following on from the previous questions and following on from Adam's point about US politics. I think quite recently, among people my age, politics has died down. But I could say 3 years ago, well, this is quite controversial, Trump was in power. Politics was on the rage. Many people spoke about it. It was all over social media. And as Lauren said earlier, social media has become a breeding ground for everything. I could say Joe Biden, the new US president, has become the official meme of TikTok. How many times he's fallen over, how many times he's done something to make people laugh. It's almost become comedic and not politics and what it stands for itself. So I would say, well, we've just said some like 70s before Margaret Thatcher. These controversial people like Margaret Thatcher, like Donald Trump, they have shaped politics. They've shown everyone gets involved. It's become a talking point for everyone. And I think while people might not agree with me here, a controversial character can do some good in politics. Thank you.
Just going to butt in, not to offend him while he's out of the room, but if James did have the answer for us to be able to change our pessimism into optimism, he could have at least told us.
Good point. And I think this is excellent that we're hearing such interesting views from all of you here on the stage, from you young panelists. And I think that's what we need to hear. Your voice needs to get out there. We're not coming to the finish at all. So there are some valid points still to be made. There's a question from, shall we hear one question from the floor, and then we'll come back to the panelists?
Thank you.
Your name is?
Christian Taylor. I'm head of English at the Langton. I'm Ed's
Lovely, thank
colleague. I teach some of these wonderful people. On the rejoining the EU question, not to be overtly partisan, but let's just say I might not agree with the people who made the previous points, but I do so graciously. What might the net effect of rejoining the EU be, not economically, but socially? Because one community, domestic community, we haven't heard alluded to in any meaningful way, because it's another thing we don't talk about in front of children, is the working class. And a lot of people from marginalised communities, like mine in the north, no violins necessary, but that's where I come from, they would have voted out for sound reasons in their own mind, and I just wondered what the net effect might be to those communities, the image of us being led by, as they would see it. I'm not, kind of lambasting anybody, metropolitan elite back into the EU, might they not react in a way that could be genuinely volatile? And that's not a threat, that's more of an open question about repercussions socially if we did that.
Is that question generally to the panel?
Yeah, anybody wants to pick up on it?
Yeah, sure.
I'm quite glad you asked that, because it's exactly what I was going to talk about. This is related to social mobility. According to the 2017 State of the Nation report, Britain is described as a deeply divided nation in terms of class, income, gender, and race. And it's not hard to see how, when the Overton window shifts in recent times to more right-leaning policies, and we have more plutocracy-leaning leaders, like Donald Trump and some could argue Boris Johnson. It's not hard to see how populism manifests into division, and it creates an us and them situation. And I think in a meritocracy, it's only natural that the working class will feel divided. And this leads to, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. In a meritocracy, when you have campaigns such as the bus and Facebook campaigns, this does lead to a great division. And so I've actually completely lost my thought. Someone take this. I've just lost my train of thought, though.
Thanks, Aidan. A question on that then. You talk about the us and them and the divisions being sown by political leaders, but isn't that existent in society already? I'll pick up on Dr. Taylor's point about the working class, and Jaden's about growing inequality. Isn't society so divided on economic lines and in terms of affluence and the gap between the rich and the poor, that you don't really need populist leaders to try and stoke that division? It's there anyway, and that we're just seeing that in our politics?
I would agree with you. I think that it's just to not be pessimist and to take a more radical approach. We may think that could be changed. I mean, the capitalist origin of liberté, égalité, fraternité, I mean, social mobility itself is kind of built on that capitalist idea. And I don't believe that this Western-oriented way of life is necessarily the only way of life. Even in social democracies, which some could describe as an altruistic form of capitalism, there seems to be less overt division and more informative media, less populist themes, I would say.
Okay, we'll take some two questions. Is it two questions over there? Yes, go ahead.
Is this? Yes, it is on. Okay, just checking. All right. From Dr. Taylor, a very Taylorite question, I think, profoundly so. I think those who know him will agree with that. And while I resent the implication that the North and the working classes are, synonymous, and there are working classes that are very southern, you could say, I think the fundamental idea that Brexit was a debate between the poor and the people that wanted to leave and the London elite who wanted to stay, I think that's a very prescient point. And I think while you could describe me as broadly Remain, and certainly at the time of the election I would have, if I wasn't in year 6, I would have voted to Remain, I would also say clearly that there is no opportunity for going back. I know that this organisation is all about that, but I think that the chance for a pragmatic approach and a rethinking and a slow approach to Brexit and the debate about that passed when David Cameron decided to wager his prime ministership on the decision. I think a second referendum would be undemocratic, and I think I was talking actually on the way here about the regret that people feel about Brexit, and that certainly exists, but regret is not a good reason to upheave our democracy. We already have a system for when people regret the decisions they made in a democracy. That's why we have elections every 5 years. With a referendum, which was a decision that was made based on what the politicians thought was the needs of the people, with a referendum, you don't have that opportunity. And I think the British people need to accept that. And I think campaigns like this need to accept that. And we need to think about what we're going to do moving forward with the reality of Brexit ahead, and actually people keep thinking the reality of Brexit behind us.
Do you mind me asking how many of you actually were able to vote in the referendum? I don't know. That's really interesting. I don't know that. None of them. No. Well, how many would vote to Remain now if you're asked now?
We already had this asked, I think.
Well, okay, but it's still a very important question, isn't it? I mean, are you saying that a referenda cannot ever be rethought, but in a general election you can rethink who's in government?
Well, that is the problem with a volatile referendum that David Cameron chose to put in place. I mean, I talk about regrets like it's something that I'm immune to. Absolutely not. Everyone has regrets about the decisions they made in a democracy. I'm sure David Cameron regrets choosing to go under the referendum and eventually losing his job. But that is what happened. And although referendums, given time, can be rethought, when it's the usual system for referendums that we have in this country, I'm thinking specifically about Scottish independence, that's every 40 years. That's not after a quick 3-year sort of frantic cycle about what we're going to do with Brexit. Clearly not enough time has passed. I mean, we were in the European Union from, I think, 1974, I believe, off the top of my head. So, and that's the amount of time we're talking about when it comes to this.
Thank you. There is a question from the audience, but I know we've still got some reactions to come, and we will let them be heard. But we'll take the question from...
Right. Chris, I just want to clarify, because I don't know with your teachers how much longer you've got. So first of all, I'll just say congratulations to all of you. You've done a fantastic job. Absolutely fantastic.
Yes, I agree.
And also to your teachers as well. But I will also say, from my experience of education, one of the things you don't get great feedback about in education, but it's really important, it's public speaking, this kind of thing. You won't necessarily set an exam, but believe you me, it's a fantastic life skill, and just keep working at it, because it will really help you. I personally don't think this discussion of the Brexit thing is going to go anywhere, because I think what you've said is really interesting. But everyone's got their own views. If it's possible, I'd like to raise a couple of completely different questions, and you're very free to respond to them or not if you want. One is we had a very interesting talk about social media. And I want to know, because that's something that's very different for our generation to yours, is it good or bad? Is it really helping you in your lives, or is it actually in some ways kind of clogging things up. So I put that question, and I want to put another question, and you're very welcome to respond or not to respond to either of these. There is a terrible war going on in this continent right at the moment. People of your age or a bit older are losing their lives, you know, and having to make the decision about what they're going to do. I mean, do you have anything that you want to say in reaction to this terrible event that's unfolding, you know, on our television screens or on social media, or have you see it? Thanks very much.
Thank you for the question. Reactions, comments?
So about the social media point, I do think that social media is starting to have a negative influence. Last night I saw a video of it was this like influencer who regularly like live streams, and he regularly makes like sexist jokes, homophobic jokes, whatever you want to say on the internet. And he was at a conference, and a young boy went up to him and he said, I won't say the word, but he said F women, right? And then the guy was like, what? And he realized the influence he had on this child that was like 10 years old. And you just wonder whether in 20 years old, when these people are going to be voting and taking a part in like having real impact on our democracy, what is actually going to happen? I think that's what really is what I'm curious about, or concerned about, because I understand that there are so many positives to social media. People are becoming smarter. Like I think there are so many young people that are so aware of political issues that are going on right now, and I do think that's partly because of social media. Although it may not necessarily come across when it comes down to it in like elections, the turnout for 18 to 24-year-olds is disappointing. But I do think that young people are genuinely interested in politics, and I think that's because of social media, and I see the positives in that. However, social media is also playing a massive role in the rise of extremism across the globe, and that is something that could potentially pull the string out on democracy, and I think that is something that I'm genuinely concerned about, and I really don't know. I don't know what to recommend, because if you stop social media, it's a violation of freedom of speech, and it suppresses people, especially minorities that aren't always able to express themselves in the mainstream. But if we allow it to continue as it goes, nobody knows what will happen, I think.
Thank you. Loads of questions arising out of that, probably, but here we go with some more reactions.
For me, what sort of concerns me and terrifies me the most about social media is that I'm sort of no longer necessarily in control of what I'm doing. So with algorithms there, if you open a social media app, that will decide what you look at and what you're interested in for the next half hour, and you're no longer looking for what you want to do yourself. And I think that's problematic, at least, with sort of what you're being sort of surrounded with your life, and what you're hearing different people talking for 20, 30 seconds about what they think. Broadly, an algorithm will go down a very narrow channel of something, and people will be, depending on even one thing that they search for once in their life, will be then sent down that channel, developing their ideas based on what sort of one very narrow group of people are saying. And a mistake that a lot of us make, I think, is that when we watch sort of short videos on social media, we tend to think, oh, right, well, every one of these videos is agreeing with itself, so that must be right. So I'll agree with that, and I'll develop my ideas based on that. And I think something that needs to change desperately is young people need to be able to decide for themselves what they need to take with a pinch of salt, what they can agree with, what they sort of think of as sort of dangerous. And that can stem from education, it could stem from legislation, but I think it needs to stem from a genuine interest and maybe a genuine fear in young people of what they're subjecting themselves to, or being subjected to.
Thank you.
I think in the new day and age with social media, we need to ask the question, what is a politician these days? Is it someone we've elected or chosen to follow? because at the end of the day, that is what social media is. If I choose to follow someone, I'm going to see everything that pops up that they've posted. For someone like The Rock, let's say, over 200 million followers, I think that's more than most local or even national politicians today. So, as I just said, we need to ask ourselves. They should. But
President of Greece, I think.
I don't think they need any more disasters there. But what I'm trying to say is, if they post something or say something political, you're going to believe them or follow them or even Google what they're going to say. But if I see someone on social media say something about Nigel Farage, for example, because he's become quite popular on social media as well, I'm probably going to ignore it more than I am a famous person or an actor, because that's just the way we are these days, or the main way most of the population are these days.
But how do we get the initiative and incentive to ignore certain things? That's the danger with a lot of people not sort of deciding what they can. A lot of people not being able to decide or not being able to formulate their political views before they're subject to this social media. Yeah. Do you want to back? Sorry.
Or as Lauren said, is social media a good or a bad thing now? Because, as you just said, what can we do? It's quite a controversial question. Some could say we shut off social media, but then we restrict freedom of speech, or we allow it to continue and see what happens. I think Dr. Taylor wants to say something.
If I may, just a really quick point, and an affirmative one, Luca, being affirmative here, and it speaks to and addresses Lauren's concerns about free speech, extremism, people like Tate and Co. What I would say is, remember what the motto or mission statement of the English department at the Langton is. Now, I won't put you on the spot. You should know what it is. It's find your own voice. So the antidote to the fear you have and the extremism of the content you experience is to live stream yourself, get followers, and spearhead some kind of counterattack. The best form of defense is attack.
There's a suggestion for young people here on the stage, and over to, let's take the chap at the end there, RK.
To answer your question about Russia and Ukraine, I think it's a colossal danger to the West. I think what Russia's doing, and while the West is doing a lot, you have to tread that line between aid and actual military engagement, because if Russia does well in this war, which it is slowly winning, roughly, what's next for Poland? What's next for Estonia? What's next for Finland? You know, there are so many countries which will be so negatively affected if Russia win this war, and it's is a very existential threat. And so I think that's my take on it.
Chris, sorry, can I just say that because we were due to be back at Langton in about 20 minutes' time, would you be able to perhaps, I know you were thinking of handing over to Jayden, but possibly if we make these last couple of quick responses, is that okay?
Sure.
Lovely, thank you.
No problem. We've still got some comments. Any comments on Ukraine to the question before? Oh, crikey, lots. Yes, so
very talkative.
That's over to AP.
Hello? Oh, there we go. Okay. I wanted to make points on both, but I'll link them. In terms of social media, I disagree with your view that it's now a modern thing that we idolize people. I mean, if you want to talk about celebrities, Donald Trump, you know, and you can also talk about like the mayor of California, Arnold. So I think that's just that's just the way human nature is, really. We tend to idolize. And also with social media, I don't think that you necessarily have to have a black and white social media or no social media. I mean, Twitter, or now X as it's called, did have policies, and that Andrew Tate was banned due to those policies. And there is the idea that certain thoughts or certain ideologies are harmful, and I don't think that necessarily has to take away freedom of speech. Now that Elon Musk owns X, Andrew Tate was unbanned, along with Donald Trump and many other people who would be referred to as providing harmful rhetoric. But so this is a scary world. I mean, to give social media this power, I mean, Elon Musk, both the owner of X, which is one of the biggest social media platforms in the world, and the owner of all Wi-Fi connectivity in Ukraine, that is a scary world to live in, with the is it Starlink? The satellites which provide Ukraine internet at the moment. And with Elon Musk in this internet sphere and how sporadic and bipolar he seems to act with his political views, it's scary to think that social media has given someone this power to take away internet connectivity from an entire country, one individual. Sorry if I was a bit scatterbrained there, but I think I answered something.
Certainly did, and made us aware of other things that perhaps not all of us here knew about. So that's another aspect to this whole discussion and debate that it's excellent to hear. Right, yes. Chap next to me.
Thank you. About the war in Ukraine, the loss of life in Ukraine is tragic. We should continue to support Ukraine to the greatest extent possible. And we must cooperate with our European partners to do that. And I say that as someone who does not actually support us being in the EU, but we must not, we must put the past behind us. We must work with the EU. We must do everything we can to support Ukraine against an imperialistic regime. Can I, in quick response to the question about class, that's very important, I agree. I grew up when I was young. I've lived in council estates. I know I'm proudly working class. And something that I do agree with the sentiment there, that people would be very angry to see us go back into the EU. However, we must also see beyond that division. Everyone here today, you guys, I see you're incredibly passionate about the EU. And I see that you are all... You do that, and I sincerely believe you do that with the greatest interests of the country at heart. And I disagree with joining the EU for the greatest, because I believe it's in the interest of our country. All of us have the interests of our country at heart, so we must unite. And I think even if we don't rejoin the EU, there's so much we can do outside the EU together that we must unite behind that, in my view at least. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, just to... Would you like to ask a question?
I wanted to return to the question of young people being pessimistic and their feeling that they can't engage in politics because it's dominated by older people and full of rather nasty, corrupt older people as well. If I could just bring to your attention the young women in Iran who have been so very brave over the last year. More than 500 of them have been killed, and they are still fighting. They're young, they're idealistic, they're young women. Then we have Greta Thunberg, who didn't hesitate to make her point when she had a point to make. And we have Malala Yousafzai from Pakistan about education of girls. These are examples of young people. They are all young women. Can we conclude from this that the pessimism of young men, who are mostly here young men, is perhaps because of the situation of young men in relation to young women becoming so outspoken and powerful? Is that part of the pessimism? I don't know whether we've got time to respond to this, but it is an important point.
Well, Because I've got to be really brief, but to end, on a more optimistic note, we are British, and Britain, in my opinion, is the best country in the world, and it's the country that has fought off Napoleon, the Kaiser, the Nazis, and we've always managed to get through situations that seem huge and that we'll never be able to overcome. And I think the issues with Brexit, with social media, with economics, to be optimistic, as a country, we will get through this. And there are figures and stats that can back my points up, but we're sort of running out of time. But to be on that optimistic note, being British is being a huge privilege, and I think there are better days ahead for our great nation.
I would love to continue this, but I'm sort of getting signs from the school that we need to conclude this, which is a great pity, because I think it got better and better as we went along, and it's absolutely wonderful to hear all these views. I attended a webinar by Neil McGregor about 2 weeks ago. He is the CEO was of the British Museum. He's written a lot of history books. He believes we need to write a new history, looking back into the past and reassess it in order to go into the future. That's just a thought I'd like to leave you with. I've written down some questions to you, which, alas, we haven't got time to answer, but I'm going to leave you with those questions, and I think I'd love to invite you to another session, which we could do. My questions are, so what is politics to you? What do you individually or as a group see as politics? And how would you ideally change society? What is your ideal society? I'll just leave you with those 2 points. I did scribble whilst you were all talking, so I've got your key points. I might come back to in a future session. Let me just say, to reiterate some of the audience's comments about all of you here on stage, it's been outstanding, and I think it's been a very enjoyable experience to hear you. I'm just amazed and bowled over by your excellent expression. 13. There we are. That would comment coming from someone who went to Oxford. So the comment on the pupils here, young people, you are articulate, you are nuanced in what you've said, you've grasped your topics exceptionally well, and you're able to respond in a calm manner, and that's very important. And you've handled all the points, you've taken questions from the audience, you've reacted to each other, and it's been a wonderful experience being here with you. I just hope that the moderator was pleased you all and tried to include you all. It does reveal your concern and show that you actually are, all of you here, are engaged in mind and hopefully in activism and perhaps campaigning in politics and in society. And I would ask you to try and influence your peer group in all the year groups that you're in, and I expect to see you as future leaders somewhere in the country. So even if it's on a local scale or a national scale, but thank you very much for being here. Thank you to the teachers that have helped you to be here, and thank you to the school. I think I'll finish. Can we have a round of applause, please?